My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to DO or Do Not. If you're interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the fourth year of the Do or Do Not podcast. I don't know where the time has gone. Our team is made up of multiple medical students from all different comms. It's really a pride to mentor these students and see them go along their own journey. This year, we've been blessed with many pre-medical students who have helped us record the stories of osteopaths in different points of their career and share their triumphs and tribulations. Today, we have the honor of listening to the journeys of 4 pre-medical students who worked on the podcast with us this year. I think this episode is great for those interested in going to osteopathic school, as the pearls are shared throughout the episode. It's also great for those of us who can think fondly and sometimes painfully on the journey to get to where we are today. I just want to share how proud I am of all of our students and how happy I am to share this episode with you today. If you're interested in working with us, we always have room for hardworking and talented medical students who are excited about osteopathic medicine. All right, guys, I am so excited to have all of you here tonight. Obviously, we usually don't even interview medical students, and this is definitely our first pre-med episode. And I'm so proud of all of you, one, for helping make the podcast successful, and more importantly, for all being accepted into medical school. And I just thought it would be really exciting to talk to all of you and share your experiences with the podcast and tell our listeners what your interview process looked like and what the trials and tribulations for you getting into medical school were like. So I think we're going to start with Ben, just because he's been with the podcast for the longest time. And then we'll kind of go through the whole group and we'll switch up the questions. But Ben, we want to start by hearing a little bit about you and just having our listeners learn a little bit about all of you. So we're going to start with, can you tell us where you grew up, where you went to college, and when you decided you wanted to go to medical school?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great way to get started. My name is Ben Berg. I grew up in Long Island, New York. I went to undergraduate school at the University of Albany. And initially, I was studying business. I ended up finishing with a degree in philosophy, actually, which is funny enough, and thinking that I might go to law school. So that was my initial intent. And as it would have it, during the COVID pandemic, I was thinking about my future, thinking about that sort of thing. And I was thinking that I might want to enter the medical field. And when I was having that realization, my father is actually a physician and he knows Dr. Storch. And we got in contact. I went to Dr. Storch's office to get some experience in the medical field. And at this point, I had no specific aspirations, whether that be towards PA school or becoming a physician or otherwise. I just wanted to get my toe wet and see what that might be like. And I really liked everything. Of course, Dr. Storch is a gastroenterologist, so I was waking up early, just changing the sheets, doing that sort of thing, helping out in the office. Nothing too glamorous, but I really enjoyed conversing with the patients, and I liked watching Dr. Storch do what he does, and everything was sort of clicking for me. And somewhere along that journey, I would hear Dr. Storch talk about osteopathic medicine and talk about this podcast. And you seemed really passionate about it, and it sounded really great. I had a slower start to my undergraduate career, just to be frank, academically speaking, but I was beginning to pick it up and get some really good grades at this point. And I was super interested in medicine, observed, but I didn't know if it was possible for me to become a physician at this point, but I really wanted it. And I think Dr. Storch sensed that, and he started giving me nudges like, hey, listen, man, if this is what you want to do, you can do it. And I think you can become an osteopathic physician.
Matt, tell us the same thing. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to college? When did you decide you wanted to be a doctor? And can you tell us when did you find out about osteopathic medicine? Where did that come in?
Thanks, Rich. Thank you for having us. Similar to Ben, I grew up here on Long Island. My parents are physicians, so I had that initial early exposure, but I was still a little hesitant. I understood that there's a lot that comes with the job. But when I got to college, just through high school, I already kind of built up a love for the sciences. When I got to college and I got my first crack at applying the sciences, I think that really drove me towards medicine. I really loved it, and I liked the hands-on aspect of working with people as well. As for finding out about osteopathic medicine, it was the same way that I found out about the podcast. I talked to Dr. Storch, kind of similar to Ben. I had a connection. My mom knew Dr. Storch just from working as physicians. And so my first time shadowing Dr. Storch was when I got that initial exposure to osteopathic medicine. I was kind of hooked on it. And this was in the earlier stages of the Do or Do Not podcast. And he told me, to go check it out. And that was how I came to hear about all of it. And since then, it's just been a part of my journey to medicine.
Lilly, you want to tell us the same thing? Where'd you grow up? When did you decide you wanted to go to medical school? Where'd you go to college? And how do you know about osteopathic medicine?
I grew up in Long Island and I go to undergrad at Binghamton University. I'm a senior now, and I initially got exposed to osteopathic medicine through a club at my school called Pre-Soma, and they went over the application process. And then once I was pretty sure that I wanted to go down that road, I joined the committee for this podcast, and I learned a lot more than I thought I would. I really got to see the insights from all the doctors that you've interviewed and all that. So then I applied to a lot of schools over the summer. And
Violet, same questions.
Thanks again for having me. A little bit different from everybody else. I actually am from a small town in Seacoast, New Hampshire, about an hour north of Boston. I just graduated this spring from the University of New Hampshire, where I ran cross country and track and was an exercise science major. I didn't know going into college what I wanted to do. I had thought in the past maybe physical therapy, maybe PA school. I'd become an LNA, licensed nursing assistant, but I wasn't sure. I was trying to keep my options open. I had a series of injuries that kept me from racing for 2 years. And I ultimately ended up being referred to an osteopathic physician in Boston, a physiatrist. And I left my first visit Googling, what is osteopathic medicine? What is physiatry? What is this? This is cool. I've never heard of this before. And as soon as I was reading about osteopathic medicine, I was like, oh, wait a second. This sounds like me. This is how I think. I didn't realize there was a difference between MDs and DOs. And that it was spring of sophomore year of college that I decided to add in some of the rest of the pre-medical classes and eventually started working as an LNA and started my path then to medical school.
Awesome. So a lot of people from New York and you're representing, right? So Ben, we're going to come back to you. Can you tell us, and you kind of answered this a little bit, but just more officially, did you take a gap year or do anything between college and applying to medical school? What did you do and why, and how did you make that decision?
Right. Because I didn't take the science classes during my undergraduate years, I finished with my initial degree, and then I went to Hunter College and I did an unofficial post-bac. So what that means is I took all of the requisite science classes on my own, not as a part of an official program. That's something that I did because it was just more convenient for my schedule, and I was advised that it would be fine as long as you got a good GPA. And that's something that I was able to do. Also, throughout that time, I shadowed physicians. I worked a bit as a medical assistant. volunteered with the Red Cross and did all those sorts of things to sort of round out my application. And of course, working for the podcast.
Have you?
When I came out of undergrad, I had a bit of a dilemma. I think because of COVID, I kind of got some experiences kind of pushed to the back burner. So when I got out of college, I had a decision to make to take a post back and work on my grades. Or another thing I also needed was more clinical and research experience, which was, mainly shut down because of COVID and those quarantine conditions. I opted for the latter. I'm actually currently in my second gap year, but what I've been doing since college was I had to take my MCAT, but I guess the main thing I've been doing is working in clinical research for the New York Cancer and Blood Specialists. It's been a really excellent experience. I get to work with oncologists and nurses and cancer patients. And that was my first real time, aside from shadowing or volunteering, but actually working in the healthcare setting, which I think was pretty invaluable and certainly helped me and gave me a lot to talk about during interviews. I also tried to get more involved in things, whether it was volunteering at the North Shore Soup Kitchen and also mainly with the podcast. I wanted to take a more active role. So I got more involved in the social media committee for Do or Do Not. And
So, Lilly, we're getting to you, and obviously you're still in college, but maybe you could talk a little bit about, do you know a lot of people that are in your class that are taking gap years, or most people going straight through? And obviously you're deciding to go straight through. If you could talk about that a little bit.
I knew I wanted to be pre-med from the start. So luckily I have had the last 4 years just be in line for medical school. So throughout those years, I've just been doing internships, shadowing, and then as of recently starting on this podcast. And the reason why I didn't plan on taking a gap year is because I enjoyed that momentum. I don't really like to take any pauses in between. But on the other hand, almost all of my classmates are taking a gap year, which I wasn't fully aware of until like the last 2 years. I thought everyone just went straight through, but being part of the pre-med community at my school, I've learned that almost everyone is taking a gap year due to things about to save up for medical school and just gaining extra experience if they don't think they have it. And the other factor is studying for the MCAT.
Violet, you're up.
I am currently in my gap year. Again, I graduated this spring, but as an exercise science major, I had a required 400-hour internship the summer after graduating. And so I decided to do that at the location that I'm actually working right now, Wentworth Douglas Hospital, which is a part of MGB in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Spent a lot of time primarily in orthopedics and in physiatry. I currently am now working as a medical assistant in physiatry, and I love it. It's great. I am working alongside 4 osteopathic physicians. 3 are alumni from the school that I'm going to this upcoming year. It's good. I enjoyed getting to shadow a lot and get to see the day-to-day life of so many different doctors this summer. I don't have any family members that are physicians or anybody in healthcare, and so it definitely was nice to see what that's like in a day-to-day deeper level, have some recurring patients and get to see continuity of care a little bit more versus just normal shadowing in undergrad. And also just trying to enjoy the gap year and prepare for medical school and see family and friends, living at home with my family, which is awesome to get to be around more before. I'm sure we won't be that much.
Probably won't be. I think that's a good assessment, but we'll bring you back next year. You'll let us know, I guess, right? Ben, tell us how you prepared for the MCAT and how many times you took it.
So preparing for the MCAT was something that I did concurrently with my undergraduate classes. And I guess one of the resources I used to prepare for the MCAT was the actual classes I was taking. For example, biochemistry and organic chemistry. I was learning as I was going, so that was helpful. But I did purchase the Kaplan books, and I did do an initial content review phase where I went through all the chapters relatively quickly, just skimming over the things that I felt like I knew and going over the things that I didn't know. I might circle back and add one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give when you're preparing for the MCAT is definitely take a diagnostic exam, even if you haven't studied at all, because that's going to give you a picture of where you are and how you need to improve. And it gives you a clear direction in a somewhat confusing process. Another thing that was huge for me was I did the UWorld question banks. I think that there's nothing better than practice questions, and they give you super detailed explanations. So really hammering those and flashcards as well. And I took the MCAT once. Thankfully, it went all right. You always feel like you could do better, but happy that it's over for sure.
Matthew?
Similar to Ben, I took the MCAT and I used some of the Kaplan test prep resources for that. No relation with the last name. But I think to echo what Ben said, the most important advice that I could give about it is don't be afraid to get your feet wet early and take those practice tests. I think I spent a little bit too long looking at trying to get all the content, but at the end of the day, the MCAT isn't the kind of test you can memorize. It's really about your test taking abilities. And so the earlier that you get in practice, the better you'll do. I took the MCAT twice. I was very happy with my score, but after the first one, I felt like I still had something to prove, still do a little bit better. I was very happy with where it ended up. And yeah, I think Ben hit the nail on the head with that one. You really got to take a diagnostic. So the better that you could keep track of your progress and see where you're going, that's really how you have to aim your studying for the MCAT.
Lilly, can you tell us a little bit about your MCAT experience, how many times you took it, and what you did to prepare?
So just like Ben, I concurrently took physics while MCAT, written part of the chem phys section when it's normally not over chemistry, but so that really helped me a lot. Also, I had a Princeton review book. I read it front to back, each section. There was a bunch of practice exams and practice questions in that book. I used Anki. I used a lot of free resources online as well because they were just so useful, and there was a bunch of them. Anki cards, Khan Academy, Quizlet, and YouTube honestly helped a lot. Yeah, like trusted channels. And I took the test once.
Violet, you want to tell us about your experience?
I took a Princeton review class. I don't know if that was necessarily the best way to go about it or not, but I was trying to fit in my studying from November to January of last year, and then this year I took the exam January of 2023. I did the class. It was studying all day, basically, with all the practice questions, and the class at night was 3 hours, which was exhausting, honestly, after undergrad classes and practice and meetings, and had to outsource a lot of club tasks and everything during that time. I don't have any regrets necessarily about the process. I think I ended up doing okay enough that it was fine, but I definitely wasn't. I don't have fond memories from those couple of months, as I'm sure most people don't. But it's one of those things that I think with trial and error, you learn how to start studying, which hopefully I'll end up using some of the resources like Sketchy and more. I use the AAMC questions as well in practice tests, which started to help a lot more towards the end of it.
All right, guys. So now I want to talk a little bit about the application process and interviews, which I'd love to break into two sections. So my first question, Ben, is did you apply to MD and DO, which that's totally fine if you did or did not for all of the people answering the question. That's number one. Number two, what were the application services like, specifically AACOM, ACOMAS? And just tell us about how many schools you applied to.
So I was somewhat open to applying MD and DO as the process began. But as I wrote my personal statement, I realized that a lot of my formative experiences and the stuff I wanted to write about, it was all DO related stuff and my journey into medicine. So that sort of answered the question for me right away. Even though I wanted to be a DO physician, I knew that. I wrote my personal statement and everything was so DO oriented. I felt that just ACOMAS was the way for me to go, which is the DO application service. And I was very comfortable with that. The application process is definitely a lot. There's a lot of things going on concurrently. Because I was sort of speeding through my prerequisites, and I took the MCAT maybe in June or July, which is sort of when you're trying to get those primary applications out. So everything was very compressed for me. It was definitely a lot writing the initial personal statement. And as far as the secondary essays go, because every school is going to send you back a set of secondary essays, that can definitely be a lot as they come in. Sometimes it's 4 to 5 prompts, up to 500 words. And if you apply to 20 or 30 schools, that's a lot of writing. So it is definitely recommended to pre-write the secondaries. I didn't have that luxury. So they were sort of firing at me and I was turning them around quickly, which was all right. It worked out. But I did apply to about, I want to say 30 osteopathic schools. So the means to do so, I know it's not necessarily a given. I would definitely recommend casting a wide net if you're comfortable going to other places, because I think that helped me a lot, just applying to so many schools.
All right, Matt, you want to tell us about your applications?
My application process, I applied only DO. I think I just knew that that was what I wanted to go for, and my application was really built around that. My general criteria then was a DO school and somewhere on the East Coast. So I ended up applying to about 15 to 20 schools, some of them being branch campuses. And one notable thing about my application process, and I think really made a notable difference, was I made use and I made time to go to events where I could put a face to my application. One example of this was Choose DO had an event in Baltimore in May, and PCOM, Philadelphia, they had a med school expo for many of the DO schools in September. And I remember actively seeking out these opportunities to go and meet an admissions counselor for some of the schools that I knew and really try to be any way that you can to get your application to stand out, to be more than a number, more than just a paper to these people. And so if I could give any big advice about the application process, I would say be on the lookout for things like that. Similar to Ben, I didn't pre-write my secondaries. So when they started coming in, all of a sudden it was writing a lot of short novels there. But overall, it's pretty good. As for using a Comus, it took a little bit of getting used to, but after a while, it's kind of like your Common App when you're first applying to college, just sending out those primary applications. I will say, though, it can get costly after you apply to however many schools. The fee can range from, with some places like West Virginia, it was free, but with most schools, it can range anywhere from $50 to $200. So the price can definitely prohibit some people from applying to many places. I was lucky enough to get to apply to all the schools that I wanted to. But my biggest bits of advice that I could give would be to seek out those opportunities to go and meet people where there will be events. And I wish I'd go back and tell myself to pre-write the secondaries. That would definitely save a lot of time.
All right, Lily, tell us about your application process.
So I actually applied both MD and DO, although my application was more geared towards osteopathic related. I just did both just in case, more applications, the better. I didn't want to risk taking a gap year, but the application process for me was not that bad. Although it was tedious, I feel like this whole summer for me was strictly applying to medical school, which included applications, finishing my physics class, and taking the MCAT. So it wasn't really a bother because that's all I had to do. But I could understand it was during the school year or something, it would be a lot more tedious and harder to complete. But I don't know. I just had all day, all summer. So it was actually pretty quick for me.
Now, Lily, I don't know much about applying to Caribbean schools, so can you talk to us a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so within my plan for applying to medical school, my parents and I decided it would be a smart decision to apply to Caribbean schools as my safety schools, just in case that I didn't get in anywhere else. Because for me, I valued not taking a gap year just due to my tendencies as a student. So I created an application for AMCAS and, of course, for also the osteopathic one. And I personally like the ACOMAS application design better than AMCAS. It was a lot more organized and easier to complete, I would say. But other than that, applying to the Caribbean schools was very easy. I just had to submit my AMCAS application, and that was really it.
And now, Lily, I'm going to add a little information. Maybe you're just not as chatty as some of the other members of the podcast. Tell me if this is incorrect. Your father is a radiologist and went to a Caribbean school, and your uncle is my favorite DO and went to an osteopathic school. Is that you're just not sharing that with us? But that's correct, right?
Yeah, sorry. So my dad went to Ross University, which is in the Caribbean. I applied to a few Caribbean schools.
So when you spoke to your father and to your uncle, were they both supportive of that application idea?
So luckily I had both sides of the coin where they both had their opinions and their experiences to help guide me to like the right path. And from both ends, my biggest priority as a student is I need like I said before, I think a gap year wouldn't help me as much as other students. I need to dive right into it.
I don't think there's anything wrong with not wanting to take a gap year.
Yeah.
Totally. Again, back in my day, it wasn't a thing. I think it's much more popular now. Violet, tell us about your application process. Tell us about where you applied. Tell us about ACOMAS.
I applied to 15 schools. Some of them had branch campuses. I wanted to submit my application as early as I could. I graduated at the end of May, and I spent the short period of time in between graduating and finishing my finals and starting my internship and working in the summer, just trying to finish my personal statement, finish my activities section and all of that so that when the application opened, I could copy and paste everything in. I only applied to osteopathic schools. That was my goal. That's all I've ever wanted to do. And so I only used ACOMAs. My personal statement was entirely focused on why I want to be an osteopathic physician. And so it was a lot easier to write the personal statement once I knew that that was what I was doing. And I submitted my ACOMAS application, I think on June 4th or 6th, like really early on, and started to hear back from schools almost immediately for secondaries. I made it a rule to submit my secondary applications and the essays within 2 days of getting the emails. And something that nobody else mentioned so far, maybe you guys are in the same boat, but most of my important emails from schools were going directly to my junk email. Some other students have been having the same. Prospective students, make sure that you are checking your regular email and your junk email because some of those important emails may go there. I was just looking and looking and looking, swiping to check all the time and submit those essays as soon as I could. I ended up hearing back for my first acceptance at the end of August, which was really nice to know early on that I had gotten in somewhere and continue working on the rest of the applications and the interviews to finish up.
That takes a big load off, I'm sure, when you know that you got into a school already. We're going to go now into interviews. Tell us about the interviews that you got. Tell us, were they virtual? Were they in person? Tell us about the differences between the two, what you liked or didn't like, and give us some examples of some questions that you were asked while you were on the interviews.
I ended up getting a bunch of interviews as things rolled on. Perhaps I applied to too many schools, but I didn't know how that was going to work out. Most of them were virtual. The vast majority of them were virtual, with the lone exception being Kirksville, which I did choose to go and visit Kirksville, which is A.T. Still University, because they do have that awesome museum there. And we have that connection with the dean, Margaret Wilson. And going to Kirksville, they were extremely welcoming. It was definitely a special experience to do the in-person interview. They treated us with a ton of respect and kindness, and that was a really awesome thing. As far as the virtual interviews go, I mean, they still vary because some of them were brief 15-minute affairs, and then some of them were almost 6 hours, including a tour, Q&As, all sorts of different things, an all-day type of thing. As far as questions that were asked, when you go online to the forums, you're going to see all these crazy questions like, what would be your theme song? Or what's a color that describes you? And then you drive yourself nuts studying for all these questions. But really, at the end of the day, they're just trying to get to know you. So the most commonly asked questions for me were, why medicine, which is really important to be able to answer that. Why osteopathic medicine? Another super important one if you're applying DO. Just tell me about yourself. And then they're going to ask you about your experiences. And if you're able to speak to those experiences in depth, that's something that I think is really important.
All right, Matt, you're up. Tell us about the interviews.
My interview is really all poured in around the same time. I got 3 interviews total. They were between the span of Halloween and November 13th. So it was all at once. All of them were virtual. I think that's just the trend now with schools trying to be more equitable for, students. Just the easiest for people to do it virtually. But there was a good bit of variation. One school was an asynchronous interview, almost like if you're taking a Casper test. It would prompt you with a question, you read it, you get a little bit, about a minute or so to think about your answer, and then about a minute and a half to video record yourself responding to the question. My second interview was a one-on-one with one of the admissions counselors at a school, definitely more conversational. One question that was asked all three times across the interviews was why osteopathic medicine? And I think for that one, very easy to go with a more generic answer of there's the philosophy, mind, body, spirit, and there's the utilization of the manipulation techniques. But I think it's really important with that one is that they have heard that and they know that. The most important thing you could do with that question, which I can almost guarantee you will be asked from a DO school, is tell them why you specifically are interested with it. Tell them about a story. How did you find out about this? What about to you was cool, not what is osteopathic medicine. And then sometimes, like Ben said, don't drive yourself crazy looking for every question to answer online, but you can expect it to be a conversation. They could be fun. One thing that stuck out to me was I was asked who are my top three favorite guitarists. So just go into it willing to have fun. At that point, they've seen your stats, they know your application, they just want to know you. The last interview I had was with two faculty, they were both professors, and that would be my biggest advice. Know your application, but also know that you got to go in there with a little bit of personality.
So I have had 2 interviews so far, only for allopathic schools. I'm still waiting on the other osteopathic schools, but the interview questions are basically the same as what they said before. I feel like the main big question that they always pull is the why medicine. I feel like they also really take a good look at your application, and they'll look at the experiences you've had and ask you about those experiences and trying to get to know your character more in like a conversational manner rather than what people anticipate with the scary stigma behind an interview. But I feel like it's really just them getting to know you, and as long as you are well prepared and you know what strengths you have and what you bring to the table, you can easily just get through an interview just by showing them who you are.
Violet, tell us your experience.
I ended up getting interviews at almost every school that I applied to, and they all varied in the format and the setup of them all. One interview was asynchronous, where you record your answer and submit it, which is strange having an interview on your own, just one-sided. Some had 8-hour info sessions with PowerPoints with every main person from the campus discussing what the school is about, their mission, their resources, student panels. Many of the interviews were a combination of current students, alumni, and faculty, and asking questions in a discussion-based format. Some of the schools had a group portion with some other interviewees to answer some questions together and see how you all are able to interact. That was definitely interesting. I had one in-person interview that I attended and then one that I declined. The in-person interview, I ended up traveling down to Florida, and it was so nice to actually get to meet other prospective students and be in person and see a campus. Listening to the PowerPoint presentations and sitting in front of a screen with your camera on Zoom for hours and hours and hours, I don't think necessarily gives you the vibe of a school and isn't the best way to actually get to know a place. Student panels and the questions are usually very similar throughout all of the different programs. So I enjoyed my in-person interview a lot.
Violet, where was that in-person interview? Which school was that?
The in-person interview was at NSU.
And did you ask them why they had it in person instead of virtual?
For me, they did have the option for it to be virtual because I was going to come from New Hampshire. I had traveled the farthest to get there, but it was a pretty easy flight compared to some of the other schools that I had applied to. Very hard to get to, plane, bus, train, etc. So that actually ended up being easier and more convenient to attend an in-person interview. And it was nice that it was offered as well. I really enjoyed my in-person interview experience. And it was definitely different also when you're being interviewed on a Zoom call and you have the whole day fair of like camera being behind the screen. It's a different type of like to be on for the time in front of the camera versus in person. You can relax a little bit more and actually be a human and talk to the other prospective interviewees and to know the school and get to know the students a little bit more instead of having to raise your hand and wait a turn to answer a question on Zoom.
So, Violet, we heard about some of the basic normal questions. Did you get asked any weird curveball, these chat room questions? Is there anything you could think of that you're like, what kind of question is this?
I had to sign an NDA for one of the most interesting questions that I was asked, but it had to do with a group project and coming up with an idea together. But during the interview for the school that I am attending, I was actually asked, what are the negatives of the school and why would I not want to go there? Which I found was definitely interesting. I think I had been very enthusiastic about why I wanted to go there. So that was a curveball, and I had to think on my toes for that. I definitely hadn't prepared for that question. So I thought that was interesting. I also, just like with Casper, I don't know if the rest of you took Casper. Some schools require it, some don't. I ended up taking it. A lot of schools asked questions similar to the Casper questions, like what would you do in XYZ scenario if you see somebody cheating, if you see a classmate's notebook, if you any type of hypothetical question. They wanted to see how you think on your toes to answer.
2 points on what you said. First of all, for those listening that don't know what an NDA is, that's a non-disclosure agreement. That's something that a lawyer writes, and it's usually something as a doctor that gives you like a little bit of chest pain. So if it asked me to sign an NDA, I'd be like, what the hell's going on? That's weird. Again, no offense to the school or the dean or whoever made that up. But also on the Casper, from what I understand, is a little bit of an ethical test. Is that right? And did you all take Casper?
I took it, and it is an ethical exam. It's unlike the other standardized tests and exams that you have to take in order to get into school. It's pretty chill, and it's just thinking on your toes about what you would do in a situation, like a hypothetical situation of you see a classmate's notebook. I feel like that's a pretty standard like example question with answers to the test question. What do you do? You have to think out loud, and especially in the interviews, you have to learn the process of sharing your thought process out loud to them so that they can hear. There's not necessarily a right question, which is difficult maybe for some of us who like to have one answer to a question and are used to that. But they just like to see how you interact with them and with the idea and explain yourself. A lot of the questions, though, were straightforward, like tell me about yourself and why medicine, why osteopathic medicine. They definitely bring up questions specific to your own application. And so you definitely want to know that and have example stories from patients. I was asked about patients, specific examples of tell me about a time that you had a difficult patient and what did you do? Or how do you, if you're going to be a leader as a doctor, how do you get somebody to do something that they don't want to do, but you need them to do it?
Now we're going to round things off a little bit. We're coming to the end of the interview. Ben, this is the fun part. Tell us, like drum roll, please, what school you chose, where you're going, and why.
All right, so I will be attending Toro University of California, College of Osteopathic Medicine. I'm so thrilled with how everything turned out, and it's probably the last place that I expected to end up when I started this process, mainly because you hear a lot of California schools have a heavy in-state bias, which may or may not be true. I mean, the student body is 90% Californians, but here I am. I'm going to be there. Initially, I was accepted to Kentucky College of Osteopathic Medicine, which I was perfectly happy with. But my thought process was I went in with an open mind as far as location, even being from New York, where there's obviously NICOM and Toro Harlem, which I did end up interviewing for Toro Harlem, which was fine. And when I was looking at schools, I was looking at things like location, match list, as far as where they're sending people for residency, if there's a variety of specialties, if they look like reputable hospital systems. So that's something I considered. I considered location, and I considered what was a good fit for me. I genuinely feel like I went into every interview and researching every school with an open mind and trying to see what faculty and what student body and what campus community really spoke to me. So I hopped on the call with Toro, California, who we know the dean is Dr. Tammy Hendricks. We interviewed her. She's awesome. She gave an awesome interview. And I went on that interview, and everyone was super personable, very informative. They have a real cadaver lab for anatomy, which is something that I placed high on my priority list. And in addition, my brother lives in San Francisco. So the school is in the Bay Area, and that's about 15 minutes from my brother. So it'll be really nice to be reunited with him. And the second that I finished that interview, I decided that I wanted to submit a letter of intent. So what a letter of intent is basically guaranteeing that if you get into that school, you're going to go to that school. And I had the feeling that this was something that I really wanted. And you can only write one letter of intent. I thought this is something that I really wanted. I don't want to leave this to chance. So I drafted the letter of intent about a page long and I submitted it. And luckily, a few days later, I got my acceptance. So I put down my deposit and I'm super happy with that.
Ben, we're all proud of you. Congratulations. Matthew, you're next. Can you tell us what school you decided on and what made that decision?
So when I initially came to Dr. Storch about a year ago to ask about this application, I told him at the top of my list was NICOM or NYTCOM. Reason being, one, it's an excellent school. It has some of these really incredible hands-on facilities. They have some of these, when we got to tour, we saw they have these high fidelity test dummies and just a lot of hands-on training in both clinics around Long Island that I think would really just be best for the kind of student that I am. But the location, of course, played a huge role in that. Funny enough, when I toured, I live about 10 minutes from the campus. When I toured the whole group that I was with, I was the only one from anywhere within like 50-mile range, which was kind of funny. But NYTCOM was the only acceptance that I got. I was lucky enough to hear back before Thanksgiving, which was really nice to spend with my family. And after that, because that was at the top of my list, you never really think you're gonna get in or that it's all gonna go the right way. But when it did, I withdrew my other applications, and I was really thrilled about it. I couldn't be more excited to go. Looking forward to it. I know that when I get to medical school, it's going to be a whole lot of work and whatnot, but I'm really looking forward to it and I'm very excited. I'm really happy it turned out this way. I think I got the best case scenario, and I think being a part of the podcast played a really large role in that. In addition to getting to speak about it during interviews, it allowed me to do a lot of networking and provided me ample opportunities to figure out what I wanted in a school, but also to kind of let these schools know who I was.
Congratulations, Matthew. Lilly, I know the game's not over and we're not done with applications, but tell us right now what your plan is and where you're thinking about going.
My process is still not over. We're in the middle of it, but as of right now, I received a non-binding commitment to St. George's, which is a school in the Caribbean. So as of now, that's my plan. If I do go there, at the end of the day, I want to be a doctor. So if I'm a allopathic doctor, not the end of the world, but my dreams will be crushed a little bit, but it's okay. I actually did visit the school last month. They do a complimentary visit for New York residents. So I got to go to the island and I got to see the school. I got to learn about the island and it was really informative. I got to see firsthand students in medical school, which I've never got to see firsthand because I never visited medical school in the past. Yeah, it was really awesome and all for right now.
Now, Lilly, just a little like Lilly stuff, because we only talk about American DO schools on the podcast, but were people like laying on the beach drinking margaritas, or was everybody in the library studying? What did they show you?
They showed us a lot. They actually showed us both sides of it. So on the school, on campus, everyone was just studying and being all serious. But off the campus, yes, everyone was on the beach. And there were even students on the beach. The first term students, they had an exam that day. So after we left the campus, we saw all the students who just got out of the exam relaxing, having a good time on the beach.
That's awesome. So far, so good. And Violet, last but not least, can you tell us about the school that you chose and why you picked it?
I am going to the University of New England, the only osteopathic school in New England. And most of the doctors in this area, if you see somebody who's a DO, for the most part, they have gone to UNE, which I have always known growing up. And the day that I decided that I wanted to go to medical school and decided that I wanted to be an osteopathic physician, in the back of my mind, it was always UNE. I had driven up and walked around the campus during COVID with my mom and was like, you know, like, yeah, I can make this happen, but how? Let's see. I'd gone to 2 open houses. I had shadowed a student. I scheduled phone calls with a ton of alumni. 3 of the doctors who I currently work with right now are alumni from UNE. And so it's great to get advice from them and get to ask experiences. We've had a medical student also at work who is currently at UNE. And so it's great to be able to have those connections nearby and still I'll have my rotations in the Northeast. I can still be close to family. And I love that they still have, it's just one campus for medical school. It's currently on the ocean, but it's going to be moving to Portland, Maine, which is a little bit more north, to a brand new building the second year, which will be great. And they still have a cadaver lab, again, huge thing. A lot of the schools are going away from cadaver labs, and that was definitely something that I really am interested in. They also have a strong osteopathic manipulation program. It wasn't a difficult decision at all. I found out I had my interview on the first day of interviews and found out I was accepted on the first day, but I did a lot of groundwork to make that happen leading up to that with open houses and shadowing. So it was really nice to not have to wait so long. I know in the past, a lot of students didn't hear back until like March or April. And so they're a little bit earlier this year. And it was really nice to know and be able to relax this year and know that that's where I'm going. And I'm super excited.
Congratulations, Violet. All right, so that we're going to wrap things up, but I got one last question, and Matthew answered it a little bit, but we're going to come back to him also. We didn't talk about the podcast. So obviously, I want to talk a little bit about what you did with the podcast, what your experience was like with the podcast, how you think the podcast helped you in your applications, and why you might advise students that will be coming after you, applying to school, to get involved. Ben, we're going to start with you.
I couldn't offer a stronger endorsement of getting involved with the podcast if you want to apply to osteopathic medical schools for a number of reasons. Firstly, being the people that I got to interact with as a member of the podcast. Initially, I was doing more social media stuff and pre-medical coordinator, just trying to get the word out. But eventually, I got to conduct my own interviews, and I attended conferences in Colorado and in Orlando where I conducted interviews, and I got to meet deans of medical schools, interview deans of medical schools, admissions counselors, all that sort of thing. So that's invaluable exposure, like Matthew alluded to earlier, making yourself really a name instead of just a random number or whatever on a page during the application process. If they could put a face to that name, that's huge. And as far as interviews go, I was asked about the podcast perhaps more than any other thing. Even in my Toro, California interview, I remember everyone else getting asked sort of more generic questions because this was a group interview, how they would handle applying to school or what was it like being a medical assistant. But when it came to me, all they wanted to talk about was the podcast. And they're like, how are you involved with this podcast? They had so many questions about it and they were so excited to talk about it. So I think that it was a great opportunity to learn more about osteopathic medicine, and the experience itself was great. And how it helped me in becoming an osteopathic physician was definitely huge.
All right, Matthew, I know you jumped the question, and I do appreciate that you're talking about the podcast. I think that's awesome. Do you have anything other than what you shared with us earlier, how it's influenced you and why you would recommend it to students that might be applying to medical school, specifically osteopathic?
I could go on, but to keep it brief, first and foremost, it's really how you get to understand osteopathic medicine and hearing from the countless physicians that we've had on it. Chances are you're going to hear from one who went to a school that you want to, is interested in a subspecialty or something, or they do something with OMM that you particularly find fascinating. So just the resources available to find out more from the podcast alone would be my first recommendation. But on top of that, like Ben said, the networking opportunities and having something to talk about with these schools to show this isn't just something that I've read about. This is something I'm involved in and I have a real dedication to. This is something I want to be a part of. I think that goes a really long way. I had the opportunity to interview the Torocom Harlem director of admissions. I think that alone put my foot in the door with some of these places. And aside from that networking aspect and finding out more, I think the most valuable part I would say is working alongside other people interested in osteopathic medicine, whether that's medical students like our own Marichelle Pita and the guy who came before me. I'm the current social media director. Before me was Ibrahim Mahmoud. And just being able to talk to both of them was invaluable, steering me towards NYT and getting to work with them. And of course, going to work with Dr. Storch, having him as a mentor on the podcast to have somebody to guide you along the way. I think it goes beyond just working on the podcast itself. It really is a community that can help you really flesh out what your goals are in the field and make them happen. So, like Ben said, I couldn't endorse him more.
Lilly, can you talk to us a little bit about your experience with the podcast?
I think joining this podcast has enriched my knowledge about osteopathic medicine a lot, because I think it's really important for whatever you're doing, whatever profession you're stepping into. I think it's important to know all about it, and listening to the experiences of the doctors and people you've had on the show has taught me so much, from things like lifestyle to their experiences and all that. So I think as a prospective osteopathic student, I think joining this podcast would be really helpful. And my position is the outreach chair. So as an undergraduate student, my job is to reach out to all the schools and show them what we have to offer, and hopefully they are receptive.
All right, Violet, last but not least.
So I ended up getting involved in the podcast after my friend Mason DeVilio. She was one of my college teammates. She goes to Alabama College of Osteopathic Medicine. We were talking about her experience starting as a first year, and she told me that she was going to get involved in the podcast. And I was like, wow, that sounds really cool. Like, I should definitely listen to an episode. And I listened to the first episode, and I reached back out to her and I was like, this is awesome. And she then said, why don't you get involved as well in the medical school outreach group that we have? And so I truly listen to the podcast driving to and from work every day. I love listening to the advice and the stories of so many different physicians. And I love that the podcast doesn't just talk about their work and what they're doing. Now it talks about their background, their story, how the good and the bad, and work-life balance, finances, many topics that aren't necessarily always covered in interviews. It might just be normally like somebody's accomplishments or the highlights of their career. I think it's important to talk about. We all have questions about how are we going to finance our education? How are we going to balance this with a family and with the rest of our lives? And so it's a fantastic resource, and I love listening to the podcast again. Like, it's been an excellent resource for me, and I'm so glad that now I can also be a part of helping to share the podcast with other schools and other people as well.
I just want to say thank you to all of you for participating in the project. Congratulations to all of you on becoming doctors, which obviously not doctors yet, but you have your foot in the door, which is awesome. And I'm sure you're all going to be successful. And thank you all for spending your time with us tonight and sharing with our listeners your experience, your knowledge, and your wisdom.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there's someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tian Yu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.